The transport ship Endeavour broke through the atmosphere of Nexara Prime with a gentle shudder that ran through its hull. Inside the main cabin, 12 humans sat strapped into their seats, watching through the viewports as the most prestigious educational institution in the known galaxy came into view. The Galactic Academy sprawled across the landscape like a city unto itself, with towers of crystal and metal reaching toward the purple sky and vast domes that housed training facilities for species from across 100 worlds. Captain Lisa Monroe unbuckled her harness and stood, her movements careful in the slightly heavier gravity of this alien world. She was a woman of average height, with short brown hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Behind her, the rest of the human delegation began to move, gathering their equipment and preparing for their first steps onto alien soil. This was the moment humanity had worked toward for 5 years, ever since first contact with the Galactic Council had opened the stars to Earth. Jake Sullivan stretched his shoulders and checked his gear one final time. He was a combat instructor from the Marine Corps, built like someone who had spent years in training rooms and obstacle courses. His face carried a few scars from his service, and his hands moved with the practiced efficiency of a soldier. Next to him, Dr. Amy Carter was reviewing medical data on her tablet, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. She had volunteered for this mission the moment it was announced, eager to study alien physiology and share human medical knowledge with the galaxy. Marcus Webb, the team's engineer, was already talking excitedly about the technology they would encounter. He was tall and lanky, with grease stains on his fingers that never quite washed away, the mark of someone who loved working with machines. Danny Clark, their pilot, stood near the exit ramp with a relaxed confidence that came from flying everything from fighter jets to cargo haulers. The other 7 specialists, experts in various fields from linguistics to agriculture, gathered their belongings and formed up behind Lisa. The ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss, and the humans got their first real look at the Galactic Academy. The landing platform was massive, easily large enough to accommodate ships 10 times the size of the Endeavour. Around them, vessels from dozens of worlds sat in various states of arrival and departure. But what caught everyone's attention was the crowd of alien students who had gathered to see the newcomers. There were hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, representing species the humans had only seen in briefing files and video transmissions. The Vexorians stood out immediately, tall beings that seemed to be made of living crystal, their bodies refracting light into rainbow patterns as they moved. Each one was unique, with different colors and formations growing from their translucent forms. They communicated through pulses of light that rippled across their surfaces, a language that human translators could only approximate. The Crothians were impossible to miss as well. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 arms ending in hands that could crush steel. Their skin was thick and ridged like armor plating, ranging in color from deep red to almost black. They moved with the confident swagger of natural warriors, and their eyes tracked the humans with obvious interest. Most of them were laughing, a sound like rocks grinding together, as they looked at the biological readouts that were being displayed on public screens around the landing area. Lisa noticed those screens and felt her jaw tighten. The displays showed human physiological data, information that had been provided to the Academy as part of the application process. Bone density, muscle mass, organ redundancy, natural defenses, all of it laid out for the alien students to see and judge. And from the reactions around the platform, the judgment was not favorable. A group of Luminar scholars floated closer, their gaseous bodies contained within elegant environmental suits that glowed with soft bioluminescence. They were known as some of the most intelligent beings in the galaxy, philosophers and scientists who had unraveled the secrets of quantum mechanics and dimensional travel. Even they looked concerned as they examined the human data, their lights dimming and what the translator indicated was worry. Professor Thalen approached the human group, his crystalline form refracting the sunlight into a spectrum of colors. He was old by Vexorian standards, with deep fractures running through his structure that spoke of centuries of accumulated knowledge. His light patterns pulsed in the formal greeting that the humans had been taught to recognize, though the translator on Lisa's collar converted his meaning into words. "Welcome to the Galactic Academy, humans of Earth," Thalen said, his voice carrying an odd musical quality through the translator. "We are honored to host your species for the first time. However, I must express some concern about your participation in our standard curriculum. Your biological specifications indicate a degree of fragility that is uncommon among spacefaring races. Lisa kept her expression neutral, though she could feel the attention of thousands of alien eyes on her team. We appreciate your concern, Professor, but I assure you that humans are capable of meeting the Academy's requirements. We wouldn't have traveled this far if we weren't prepared. Thalen's light patterns flickered in what might have been doubt. Perhaps you misunderstand the rigors of our program. Many of our physical training exercises take place in environments that would be lethal to unprotected humans. Your lack of natural armor, redundant organs, or enhanced healing capabilities places you at significant risk. The Council has decided to place your delegation in modified courses with appropriate safety measures. Behind Lisa, Jake Sullivan shifted his weight slightly, a movement so subtle that only his fellow humans would recognize it as irritation. Marcus Webb glanced at the data screens and then away, his expression carefully controlled. Amy Carter's hand tightened on her medical kit, but she said nothing. We understand the risks, Professor, Lisa replied, keeping her voice steady and professional. But we didn't come here to be treated as special cases. We came to learn alongside the other students, to prove that humanity belongs among the stars. Thalen's lights pulsed in a pattern that the translator struggled to interpret, settling finally on something like pity, mixed with respect for determination. Very well. We will begin with the modified program, and perhaps in time we can evaluate your progress. For now, please follow the guides who will show you to your quarters. Classes begin tomorrow at the first light cycle. The human delegation followed their assigned guides, a pair of young Luminar students who floated ahead of them through the massive corridors of the academy. Around them, alien students stopped to stare, pointing and whispering in dozens of languages. The humans could hear the translations through their collars, a constant stream of commentary that ranged from curious to dismissive. Look, how small they are, one voice said. There, bones would snap like dried twigs, another commented. Why would the Council admit such fragile creatures? A third wondered. Perhaps it is a charity case, someone suggested. The humans are primitives who only recently achieved faster than light travel. Maybe this is meant to encourage them. Danny Clark leaned close to Jake and muttered quietly, starting to feel like we're in a zoo. Jake didn't respond immediately, his eyes scanning the architecture and the other students with the tactical awareness that had kept him alive through multiple combat deployments. Finally, he said, let them look. Let them make their assumptions. We'll show them what humans can do soon enough. The quarters assigned to the human delegation were in a section of the academy designed for species with similar environmental needs. The rooms were spacious and well-appointed, with adjustable gravity controls and atmospheric processors. But they were also isolated, separated from the main student housing by several corridors and security doors. The message was clear. The humans were guests, perhaps even curiosities, but not quite equals. That evening, the delegation gathered in Lisa's quarters to discuss their situation. The mood was tense but determined. Everyone had heard the comments, seen the dismissive looks, felt the weight of being judged as inferior before they had even begun. They've already written us off, Marcus said, pacing the room with restless energy. Did you see those combat trials posted on the schedule? They've put us in the beginner classes, the ones meant for species who can barely lift their own body weight. Amy nodded, her tablet displaying the modified curriculum that had been assigned to them. The medical protocols they've set up for us are excessive. They're treating us like we might collapse from basic exercise. Lisa stood at the window, looking out over the academy grounds where alien students trained under floodlights. She could see Crothian warriors practicing combat maneuvers, moving with speed and power that seemed impossible for beings so large. In another area, students were running obstacle courses in high gravity, leaping gaps that would kill a human who failed to make the distance. They're not wrong about our biology, she said finally, turning to face her team. We are more fragile than most of the species here. Our bones do break easier. We don't have armor or redundant organs. On paper, we look like we don't belong here. So what do? Danny asked. Lisa smiled, an expression that didn't quite reach her eyes but held something harder, something determined. We show them that humans are more than... 3 weeks passed with agonizing slowness for the human delegation at the Galactic Academy. Every morning they attended classes designed for the weakest species in the galaxy, sitting through lectures on basic physics they had mastered years ago, and participating in training exercises that felt more like gentle stretching than actual preparation. The modified curriculum was an insult disguised as consideration, and every human on the team felt the weight of it. Lisa Monroe sat in a tactical strategy class, watching a holographic display show combat scenarios that Earth military academies would assign to first-year cadets. Around her, alien students from low-gravity worlds struggled with concepts that seemed painfully obvious. The instructor, a floating luminar named Kess, moved slowly through each point as if speaking to children. Lisa made notes not on the lesson but on what she observed about the other species, their movements and reactions, storing information that might prove useful later. In another section of the academy, Jake Sullivan endured his own frustration during what the Crothians laughingly called combat training. The exercise was meant to teach basic defensive positions, but the movements were so simplified that Jake felt like he was in a kindergarten class. His instructor, a young Crothian named Drac, demonstrated blocks and strikes with exaggerated slowness, constantly checking to make sure Jake wasn't straining himself. The other students in the class were mostly from peaceful species who had never known conflict, and they treated the exercises with appropriate seriousness. Jake went through the motions while watching the advanced combat classes in the adjacent arena, where real warriors trained with speed and violence that made his blood sing with the desire to compete. Marcus Webb found his engineering courses equally disappointing. The problems they were given to solve were basic, the kind of calculations that any competent mechanic could do in their sleep. He finished his assignments in minutes and spent the rest of each class period studying the Academy's advanced technology, making sketches and notes that he hid from his instructors. The Vexorian professor who taught his class kept praising him for his quick understanding, but Marcus could hear the surprise in those compliments, the unspoken assumption that humans shouldn't be capable of even this basic work. Amy Carter had perhaps the hardest time of all. As a medical officer, she was placed in classes about basic first aid, learning how to treat minor injuries for species whose biology she had studied extensively before coming to Nexara Prime. She knew more about Crothian cardiovascular systems than most of the aliens in her class, had written papers on luminar energy distribution, but she sat quietly and listened to lectures that covered information she could recite from memory. The other students avoided her, worried that the fragile human might accidentally hurt herself with the medical equipment. But the evenings were different. When the main student population retired to their quarters or social areas, the humans took over empty training facilities and pushed themselves through exercises that would have horrified their instructors. They ran obstacle courses in standard gravity, lifted weights that left them trembling and sweating, practiced combat drills that Jake had learned from some of the toughest soldiers on Earth. They came back to their quarters each night covered in bruises and exhausted to the bone. But they kept going because stopping meant accepting the galaxy's judgment of their worth. Danny Clark became their scout, using his pilot clearances to access different areas of the Academy and report back on what the other species were learning. He watched Crothian combat tournaments in the main arena, studied how Vexorian students solved complex engineering problems through group consensus, observed the way Luminar scholars debated philosophy while simultaneously running tactical simulations. He brought back recordings and notes that the team studied like intelligence reports, learning everything they could about their competition. The breaking point came during a joint tactical simulation in their 4th week. The exercise was meant to be simple, a basic scenario where mixed teams had to coordinate to rescue survivors from a damaged station. Lisa's team was paired with a group of Crothian students led by a warrior named Vector, who had distinguished himself in the advanced combat classes that humans weren't allowed to attend. Vector was everything the Crothians valued in a fighter. He stood 8.5 feet tall with deep red armor-like skin that bore scars from dozens of training battles. His forearms moved with coordinated precision, and his voice carried the confidence of someone who had never met a challenge he couldn't overcome through pure physical dominance. He looked at the humans the way someone might look at children playing dress-up in soldier uniforms. The simulation began well enough. The scenario displayed a station breaking apart in space with multiple hull breaches and survivors trapped in different sections. The team had 30 minutes to plan their approach before the simulation would begin running in real time. Lisa immediately started analyzing the damage patterns and proposing entry points, her mind working through the logistics with the speed of someone trained in crisis management. Vector interrupted her after less than 2 minutes. "This is pointless," he said, his translator rendering his words with barely concealed contempt. "Why are we wasting time with planning? The solution is obvious. We breach the main hull here, fight through to the survivors, and extract them by force." Lisa kept her voice level. "That approach ignores 3 hull fractures that will collapse if we put stress on that section. We need to stabilize the structure first or we'll kill everyone inside." One of Vector's 4 hands waved dismissively. "Crothian ships are built stronger. We don't worry about such fragile construction. You think like prey. Always afraid. Always looking for the careful path. Warriors act decisively." Jake Sullivan had been standing quietly near the back of the planning area, but now he stepped forward. His posture was relaxed, but anyone who knew him would recognize the dangerous calm that preceded violence. "And how many warriors die because they act without thinking?" he asked softly. Vector turned to face him, and the size difference was almost comical. The Crothian towered over Jake, outweighed him by hundreds of pounds, could probably tear him apart without much effort. But Jake didn't step back, didn't show even a flicker of intimidation. He just stood there meeting Vector's eyes with the steady gaze of someone who had faced down threats far worse than an arrogant alien student. "Are you challenging me, human?" Vector asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. "I'm asking a question," Jake replied. "You talk about acting decisively, but decision without analysis is just recklessness. On Earth, we have a saying about people who charge in without planning. We call them casualties." The other Crothian students moved closer, forming a semicircle that felt more like a threat display than casual interest. Marcus and Danny shifted positions subtly, moving to flank Jake without making it obvious. Amy stayed where she was, but her hand rested near her medical kit, ready for whatever might happen next. Vector's armored skin flushed darker, a sign of rising aggression that the humans had learned to recognize. "Your species is barely capable of leaving your own star system, yet you presume to lecture Crothians on combat? We were conquering worlds when your ancestors were still crawling in mud. And yet here we are," Lisa said, stepping forward to stand beside Jake. "Attending the same academy, taking the same courses, or we would be, if anyone gave us the chance to prove ourselves." The tension in the room could have been cut with a knife. Other students from different species had stopped their own planning to watch the confrontation, sensing that something significant was happening. Professor Thalen, who had been observing the simulations from a control room above, began making his way down to the training floor. Vector stared at the humans for a long moment, his 4 hands flexing as if imagining combat. Then he did something unexpected. He laughed, a sound like boulders rolling down a mountain. "You want to prove yourselves? Very well, I issue a formal challenge. The humans will participate in the Academy performance trials that begin in 2 weeks." A collective gasp went through the watching students. The performance trials were legendary throughout the Academy, a brutal week-long competition that tested every aspect of a student's capabilities. Species sent their best warriors, their finest scholars, their most capable survivors. The trials had a medical casualty rate of nearly 40%, with injuries ranging from broken bones to complete system failures. Some students had died in past trials, their bodies unable to handle the extreme conditions. Lisa felt her heart rate spike, felt the weight of every eye in the room on her team. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the chance to show the galaxy what humans could do, but it was also terrifyingly dangerous. The trials would push them beyond anything they had trained for, beyond what anyone thought human bodies could handle. She looked at Jake, who gave her the smallest nod, looked at Marcus, who straightened his shoulders and met her gaze with determination, looked at Danny and Amy, who stood ready despite the fear she could see in their eyes. Then she looked at the rest of their team, scattered around the training floor, and saw the same resolve on every face. "We accept," Lisa said clearly, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent. The morning of the performance trials arrived with Nexara Prime's sun casting long shadows across the Academy's main arena. Thousands of alien students packed the observation platforms, their excited conversations creating a buzz that echoed through the massive structure. The arena itself was a technological marvel, capable of generating any environment the trials required, from frozen wastelands to burning deserts to the airless void of space itself. Lisa Monroe stood with her team in the preparation area, checking equipment one final time. The past 2 weeks had been the most intense training period of her life, pushing far beyond what their instructors thought safe. Every muscle in her body ached, but beneath the fatigue was a core of determination that felt unbreakable. Around her, Jake stretched carefully. Danny checked his suit seals, Amy organized medical supplies, and Marcus reviewed the technical specifications they had been given for the trials. The other competing teams gathered in their own preparation zones. The Crothians looked confident as always, their armored skin gleaming under the arena lights. Vector stood at the center of his team, all 4 arms crossed as he stared at the humans with an expression that mixed anticipation with absolute certainty of their failure. The Vexorians hummed with light patterns that indicated excitement, their crystalline forms refracting rainbows across the floor. Even the normally peaceful Luminar scholars seemed energized, their gaseous bodies glowing brighter than usual within their containment suits. Professor Thalen's voice echoed through the arena as he explained the first trial to the assembled students and spectators. The endurance gauntlet would test the most basic requirement of any species hoping to survive in hostile territory: the ability to keep moving when everything screamed at you to stop. 50 kilometers of varied terrain, extreme temperatures, toxic environments, and elevation changes that would challenge even the strongest cardiovascular systems. Standard Academy environmental suits would provide minimal protection, just enough to prevent immediate death but not enough to make the journey comfortable. The course materialized in the arena through a combination of hard light projections and actual environmental manipulation. Lisa could see the starting point leading into what looked like a desert, with heat waves already distorting the air. Beyond that, the course disappeared into generated distance. But the briefing had told them what waited: Arctic conditions, caustic swamps, mountain ranges, and sections where the atmosphere itself would be barely breathable. 40 teams lined up at the starting point, representing 20 different species and the best students the Academy had to offer. The humans took their position near the middle of the pack, trying not to think about the fact that betting pools had them listed at 500 to 1 odds of finishing in the top half. Most wagers predicted they wouldn't complete even 20 kilometers before medical intervention became necessary. The starting signal blazed across the arena displays, and the team surged forward. The Crothians immediately sprinted ahead with their powerful legs eating up distance in massive strides. Several flying species took to the air, using the rules that allowed any form of locomotion natural to the participant. The Vexorians moved in a coordinated group, their crystalline bodies reflecting light in patterns that seemed to boost each other's speed. The humans settled into a steady jog that looked painfully slow compared to the explosive starts around them. Danny set the pace at the front, his pilot training having included extensive endurance work. The others fell into formation behind him, their breathing controlled and their movements economical. They had discussed strategy endlessly over the past 2 weeks and had decided to trust in something the other species seemed to have forgotten: that marathons are not won in the first kilometer. The desert section hit them like a physical wall. The temperature soared above 50 degrees, and the sand beneath their feet radiated stored heat that turned their suits into ovens. The Crothians ahead began to slow, their bodies built for short bursts of intense activity starting to struggle with sustained effort in extreme conditions. Several teams stopped to rest in the shade of artificial rock formations, trying to cool down before continuing. The humans kept jogging, sweat poured down their faces and their breathing grew heavier, but they maintained their pace. This was nothing compared to survival training in Death Valley or jungle warfare school in the Philippines. They had evolved on a planet that featured every hostile environment imaginable, and their bodies knew how to regulate temperature through methods that most alien species lacked. By the 15-kilometer mark, the course transitioned into Arctic conditions with a brutality that was meant to shock competitors into mistakes. The temperature plunged to -30 degrees, and ice formed on every surface. Wind generated by the arena's environmental systems howled with enough force to knock lighter species off their feet. The Crothians, who had sprinted so confidently at the start, were now moving at a crawl, their metabolism struggling to adjust to the rapid temperature change. The humans pulled on additional insulation layers and kept moving. Their pace slowed slightly as they navigated ice fields and climbed over snowdrifts, but they never stopped. Jake called out encouragement when he saw team members flagging, reminding them of cold weather training in Alaska, of exercises where they had pushed through conditions just as bad with worse equipment. The alien spectators watching from climate-controlled observation platforms began to notice that the human team was steadily moving up in the rankings. The toxic swamp section was where many teams gave up entirely. The water was laced with chemicals that could burn through exposed skin, and the air was thick with vapors that challenged even advanced filtration systems. The course required teams to wade through chest-deep water while navigating around predator simulations and avoiding patches of quicksand that could trap the unwary. Marcus took point here, his engineering background allowing him to spot the safest paths through the chemical soup. Amy monitored everyone's exposure levels, making sure no one's suit was compromised. The smell was horrific even through their filters, and the physical effort of moving through the resistant liquid drained strength from muscles already pushed to their limits. But they kept going because stopping meant admitting defeat. And none of them had come this far to quit. The mountain section was the final test, a vertical climb of 3,000 meters with thin atmosphere and exposure to cold that made the Arctic section seem mild. This was where the humans' adaptability showed most clearly. They had grown up on a world where elevation changes were dramatic, and humans had learned to function everywhere from sea level to the peaks of Himalayan mountains. Their bodies knew how to extract oxygen from thin air, how to maintain core temperature while climbing, how to keep moving when every breath burned and every muscle screamed. Other teams struggled past them on the climb, using technological assists or natural abilities that let them bypass the worst of the altitude effects. But many more had already dropped out, unable to handle the sustained effort required. The Crothians, so dominant at the start, were scattered across the course in various states of exhaustion. Several Vexorian teams had literally shattered from thermal stress, their crystalline structures unable to handle the extreme temperature variations. Danny pushed the team up the mountain with the same steady pace they had maintained from the start. It was slower now, their bodies operating on reserves that felt bottomless but had to have a limit somewhere. Blood pounded in their ears and their vision narrowed to just the next handhold, the next step upward. But they climbed because humans were persistence hunters, because their ancestors had chased prey across savannas until the faster animals collapsed from exhaustion, because giving up was not in their genetic makeup. The final stretch was a descent from the mountain peak to the finish line visible in the distance. Gravity helped now, but it also threatened to send exhausted bodies tumbling out of control. The humans locked their knees and controlled their descent, using techniques learned from mountain warfare training. Their suits were torn and stained. Their faces were masks of exhaustion behind their helmets. But they were still moving. Lisa saw the finish line growing closer and felt something fierce and primal rise in her chest. They were going to finish this. Not just finish, but finish well, ahead of teams that everyone had assumed were superior. She glanced back at her team and saw the same realization dawning on their faces, the same savage joy that came from proving everyone wrong. They crossed the finish line together, staggering the last few meters on legs that barely functioned. The official time displayed above them showed they had placed fourth overall, ahead of teams from species considered natural survivors, ahead of warriors and explorers who had conquered hostile worlds. The alien spectators fell silent as the impossible result was confirmed and then reconfirmed by the automated systems. Medical teams rushed forward with scanning equipment. Convinced the humans must be on the verge of collapse, they found exhaustion certainly, dehydration and muscle fatigue, but nothing that required immediate intervention. The humans were standing, breathing hard but steady, already recovering in ways that the medical staff didn't quite understand. Human bodies were designed to bounce back. The combat arena was smaller than the endurance course but somehow felt more dangerous. The floor was made of impact-resistant material that could absorb tremendous force without breaking, and the walls were lined with medical stations ready to respond to injuries. Brackets displayed on massive screens showed the tournament structure, single elimination matches that would continue until only one fighter remained standing. Padded weapons lined racks along the preparation areas, designed to hurt without causing permanent damage, though the definition of permanent varied wildly between species. Jake Sullivan stood in the human preparation zone, methodically wrapping his hands and checking his gear. The arena officials had provided him with a standard combat suit reinforced at the joints and vital areas, but it was minimal protection compared to what many species brought naturally. Around the arena, other fighters prepared in their own ways. The Crothians performed ritual challenges, roaring and beating their chests. The Vexorians synchronized their light patterns into aggressive displays. Even some of the typically peaceful species had sent combat specialists who moved with predatory grace. Lisa and the rest of the human team sat in the observation area assigned to them, watching as the first matches began. The fighting was brutal and efficient, showcasing techniques developed over thousands of years on dozens of worlds. A Crothian warrior named Gresh faced a six-limbed arachnid fighter, and the match lasted less than 2 minutes before the arachnid was thrown from the ring with enough force to crack its environmental shell. The medical team rushed in immediately, but the damage was done. The bracket showed Jake would face his opponent in the 5th match. His name appeared next to that of a Crothian called Thrak, one of Vector's training partners and known for his aggressive fighting style. The betting displays updated constantly, showing Jake at 40-1 odds of winning even a single match. Most analysts predicted the fight would end in the first 30 seconds when Thrak's superior strength allowed him to simply overwhelm the human. Danny leaned close to Lisa and spoke quietly. Jake's been watching their fighting style for weeks now. He knows what he's up against. Lisa nodded but couldn't shake the worry that tightened her chest. She had seen Jake fight during training, knew he was one of the most skilled hand-to-hand combat specialists Earth had produced. But this was different. The Crothians weighed 3 times what he did, and could hit with enough force to shatter concrete. One mistake, one moment of slower reaction time, and Jake would be seriously hurt. The 4th match ended with a Vexorian fighter using light-based disorientation to confuse and defeat a Luminar opponent. The crowd roared its approval as the Luminar floated from the arena, its containment suit flickering with patterns that indicated concession. Then the displays showed Jake's name and the arena fell into an expectant hush. Everyone wanted to see if the humans who had surprised them in the endurance trial could possibly compete in direct combat. Jake walked into the arena with the calm confidence of someone who had been in far more dangerous situations than a tournament fight. He carried a padded staff as his chosen weapon, a simple choice compared to the exotic options available. Thrak entered from the opposite side, and the size difference was even more dramatic in the open space of the arena. The Crothian stood 8 feet tall with 4 arms, each one ending in hands that could crush metal. His red-armored skin bore scars from countless fights, and his eyes held the absolute certainty of victory. The signal sounded and Thrak charged immediately, using the exact aggressive opening that Jake had seen Crothian fighters employ dozens of times during his observation. It was a standard tactic, using superior mass and speed to overwhelm opponents before they could develop a defense. Against most species, it worked perfectly because few beings could withstand the initial impact. Jake didn't try to stand his ground. He moved sideways with a speed that caught Thrak by surprise, using the staff to redirect one of the Crothian's reaching arms, rather than blocking it directly. The momentum of Thrak's charge carried him past Jake's position, and for just a moment the Crothian's back was exposed. Jake's staff flicked out in a strike that hit exactly where the Crothian's lower spine connected to his hip structure, a point that required no great strength to impact but sent pain signals screaming through the nervous system. Thrak stumbled and turned with a roar of anger. He swung 2 arms in a devastating combination that would have ended the fight if it connected. Jake ducked under the first strike and stepped inside the range of the second, getting too close for Thrak's long arms to generate full power. His staff struck upward into the Crothian's armpit, another vulnerable joint where nerves were close to the surface regardless of how thick the outer armor might be. The alien crowd began to realize they were watching something they had never seen before. Jake wasn't trying to match strength against strength. He was fighting the way humans had always fought against larger predators, using superior agility and tactical thinking to find weaknesses that strength couldn't protect. Every movement was economical. Every strike targeted locations that would cause maximum disruption with minimum force required. Thrak grew more aggressive and more frustrated as the fight continued. He landed several hits that sent Jake rolling across the arena floor, impacts that would have broken bones in many species. But Jake kept getting up, kept moving, kept coming back with that same calm focus. Human bodies were designed to absorb punishment, to keep functioning even when damaged, to push through pain that would disable other creatures. 5 minutes into the match, Thrak was breathing heavily, all 4 arms showing signs of fatigue. Jake was bleeding from a cut above his eye and moving with a slight limp, but his strikes were still precise and his defense still sound. The Crothian lunged forward in a desperate attempt to end the fight, and Jake did something that would be analyzed in combat classes for years afterward. He didn't dodge. He stepped directly into the charge, dropped low, and used his entire body as a fulcrum to redirect Thrak's massive weight over his shoulder. The Crothian hit the arena floor with stunning force, and before he could recover, Jake was on him with the staff pressed against his throat. Not hard enough to cause real damage, but positioned perfectly to end the fight if Thrak continued to struggle. For 3 long seconds they held that position, and then Thrak's hand slapped the ground in the universal signal of submission. The arena exploded with noise. Half the crowd was cheering while the other half argued about what they had just witnessed. The humans had not only competed in combat, one of them had defeated a Crothian warrior in single combat. The betting pools went into chaos as people tried to cash out or change their wagers on future matches. Jake helped Thrak to his feet, showing the respect that warriors give to worthy opponents. The Crothian looked at him with an expression that mixed shame at losing with genuine curiosity. "How?" Thrak asked simply. "Your strength is nothing compared to mine." "Your body should have broken." Jake wiped blood from his face and answered with the truth. "You're right that you're stronger, but strength isn't everything. I've been fighting my whole life, trained by people who understood that you don't have to be the biggest to win. You just have to be smarter, faster to adapt, and too stubborn to quit." The tournament continued through the day with Jake advancing through each round. He defeated a Vexorian whose light-based attacks were countered by simply closing his eyes and fighting by sound and touch. He outlasted an arachnid fighter whose 6 limbs gave it tremendous advantage until exhaustion made those limbs slow and predictable. Each fight left him more battered, more exhausted, but he kept winning through a combination of technique, adaptability, and sheer human stubbornness. Meanwhile, the other trials continued in parallel. The Engineering Crisis Challenge brought Amy and Marcus into the spotlight. The scenario involved a simulated ship losing life support with crew members trapped in various sections. Teams had to restore power and atmosphere before time ran out, and the puzzle was designed to take hours of careful analysis and methodical work. Amy looked at the schematic for 30 seconds before making a decision that would horrify safety instructors across the galaxy. A ventilation shaft led directly to the power junction that needed repair, but it was too narrow for normal passage and partially collapsed. She stripped off unnecessary equipment, squeezed into the shaft, and began crawling through a space that could crush her if the structural integrity failed any further. Marcus held the unstable section open through pure muscle power, his hands bleeding as sharp edges cut into his palms. But he didn't let go because letting go meant Amy would die. The alien students watching couldn't believe what they were seeing. This was reckless, dangerous, the kind of risk-taking that no sensible species would attempt. But Amy reached the junction, made the repairs with steady hands despite the danger, and Marcus held his position until she was clear. They solved the puzzle in 43 minutes, the fastest time recorded in Academy history, and they did it by doing something the other species wouldn't even consider. The zero-gravity rescue trial came next, and here Danny proved that human pilots had capabilities the galaxy hadn't anticipated. The scenario involved a debris field around a damaged station with Survivor's knee. The final trial began at dawn with teams being transported to a wilderness simulation zone that covered hundreds of square kilometers. The environment was a mixture of the galaxy's most hostile terrain types, combining dense jungle with rocky mountains, rivers that ran with chemicals barely safe to touch, and weather patterns that could shift from clear skies to violent storms in minutes. Each team received minimal supplies, basic shelter materials, 3 days of emergency rations, water purification tablets, and a medical kit. The objective was simple: survive for 72 hours while completing various checkpoints scattered across the terrain. Lisa Monroe's team had been assigned 3 alien companions for this trial. Vector the Crothian warrior stood with them, his earlier arrogance replaced by something like cautious respect after watching Jake's performance in the combat tournament. Priya the Luminar scholar floated in her containment suit, her gaseous form glowing with curious patterns as she studied the humans with new interest. The youngest member was Shen, a Vexorian student whose crystalline body refracted the morning light into dancing rainbows. None of them had wanted to be paired with humans at the start of the trials, but now they watched the Earth delegation with expressions that ranged from curiosity to outright fascination. The teams were dropped at random locations across the simulation zone. Lisa's group found themselves in dense jungle near the base of a mountain range, with their first checkpoint marker showing a location 15 kilometers to the northeast. The terrain was brutal, with vegetation so thick that visibility dropped to a few meters and humidity that made every breath feel like drowning. The temperature was already climbing toward levels that would be dangerous by midday. Marcus immediately began assessing their supplies and planning shelter construction while Danny scouted the immediate area for threats. Amy checked everyone's hydration levels and started organizing the medical kit. Jake stood at the perimeter watching the jungle with the alertness of someone who had survived in environments like this before. The alien team members watched this coordinated activity with growing amazement at how quickly the humans adapted to the situation. "We should establish base camp here and wait out the heat," Vector suggested, his tactical training telling him that movement in extreme conditions was inefficient. Lisa considered this but shook her head. "The checkpoint system means teams that move faster score higher. If we wait for perfect conditions, we'll fall behind. Better to push through and rest during the storm cycle that's predicted for tonight." Shen's crystalline form pulsed with uncertain light patterns. "But humans are not adapted for this heat. Your biology reports indicate thermal regulation problems in extreme humidity." Jake smiled grimly as he adjusted his pack. "Reports don't know everything about humans. We evolved in climates like this. Our bodies can handle it if we're smart about water and pace." They began moving through the jungle with Marcus cutting path using techniques he had learned during engineering deployments in tropical regions. The aliens struggled more than expected. Vector's heavy armored body was designed for cooler climates and he began overheating within the first hour. Priya's containment suit had difficulty maintaining proper pressure in the humidity. Even Shen found his crystalline structure refracting light in ways that made him overheat internally. The humans, meanwhile, sweated profusely but kept moving. Their bodies used evaporative cooling that most alien species lacked. A simple but effective system that let them function in heat that would incapacitate others. Amy monitored everyone and made the call to stop after 2 hours. Not because the humans needed rest, but because their alien teammates were approaching dangerous stress levels. They found shelter under an overhang, and Amy began treating Vector's heat exhaustion while Marcus rigged a shade system that helped cool Priya's suit. The Crothian warrior looked at the humans with confusion and something that might have been embarrassment. "You are still functional. How is this possible? The temperature exceeds your recommended operational range." Danny, who was keeping watch while eating an energy bar, answered casually. "Humans are from a planet with extreme climate variation. We had to learn to function everywhere from frozen tundra to desert heat. Our bodies adapted to handle pretty much anything." The second checkpoint required them to cross a river that ran with water slightly acidic enough to burn exposed skin. The aliens stared at the obstacle trying to calculate safe crossing points. Jake simply waded in, his suit providing minimal protection but his pain tolerance allowing him to push through the discomfort. He established a rope line across the current and helped each team member cross, ignoring the burns he was accumulating. By the time they reached the far bank, Jake's hands and legs showed angry red marks where the water had contacted skin. Amy treated the burns with supplies from the medical kit, while Shen watched in horrified fascination. "Why did you not wait for us to construct a safer crossing method?" The Vexorian asked. "Because waiting would cost us hours we don't have," Jake replied. "The burns will heal. Losing time won't." Night brought the predicted storm with winds that threatened to tear apart their hastily constructed shelter. Rain hammered down with enough force to be painful, and lightning struck close enough that they could feel the thunder in their bones. The aliens huddled in the center of the shelter, their species having little experience with weather this violent. The humans took turns reinforcing the structure, working through the night in conditions that terrified their teammates. Priya observed Lisa working in the driving rain, her human body clearly exhausted but still functional, still focused on the task. The Luminar's lights pulsed in patterns that indicated she was fundamentally reassessing her understanding of human capability. These creatures should have been the first to fail, the weakest members requiring protection and assistance. Instead, they were keeping the entire team alive through sheer determination and refusal to acknowledge their supposed limitations. The third day brought the final challenge. Their shelter had collapsed during a particularly violent gust of wind, and debris had struck Shen, cracking his crystalline structure in several places. The Vexorian was in serious pain, barely able to move without risk of shattering completely. The final checkpoint was still 8 kilometers away through mountain terrain, and they had 6 hours to reach it. Vector looked at Shen, and then at the humans. "We should call for emergency extraction. Shen cannot travel in his condition." Amy was already examining the Vexorian's injuries with the focused intensity she brought to all medical situations. "The cracks are stable if we immobilize them. Marcus, can you rig a carrying frame from the shelter materials?" Marcus was already pulling apart their destroyed shelter and assembling pieces in ways the original designers never intended. Within 20 minutes, he had created a makeshift stretcher that would distribute Shen's weight and prevent further damage to his crystalline structure. Jake and Danny tested it, then nodded to Lisa. "We carry him," Lisa said simply, and there was no room for argument in her voice. Vector stared at them. 8 kilometers through mountains while carrying additional weight? Your bodies will fail. This is not possible. Jake shouldered one end of the stretcher and looked at the Crothian with an expression that was equal parts determination and challenge. "You keep saying things aren't possible for humans. Maybe you should stop making assumptions about what we can and can't do." They climbed through mountain terrain that would have been difficult without the added burden of carrying an injured team member. The humans rotated positions on the stretcher every 30 minutes, their muscles screaming but their grip never faltering. Vector tried to help but found that his forearms, designed for combat and heavy lifting, were poorly suited for the sustained, careful carrying required. Priya provided what assistance she could from her floating position, but the physical work fell primarily to the humans. Amy walked alongside the stretcher, monitoring Shen's condition and talking to him constantly, keeping the young Vexorian focused and calm despite his pain and fear. Her voice was steady and reassuring in a way that transcended species, the universal language of a healer who refused to let their patient give up hope. They reached the final checkpoint with 40 minutes to spare. The humans lowered the stretcher gently, making sure Shen was stable before checking in with the monitoring system. Their team placement flashed on the display, 2nd overall, an achievement that would have seemed impossible 5 days ago. But more importantly, every member of their team was alive and would recover fully. Medical teams rushed forward immediately, surrounding Shen with equipment to stabilize his crystalline structure. The Vexorian's light patterns pulsed weakly but formed words through the translator. "You carried me. You did not leave me behind even when it cost you first place. Why?" Lisa knelt beside the stretcher so she could look directly at Shen. "Because that's what humans do. We don't leave our people behind. We don't quit because something is hard. We keep going until everyone makes it home." Professor Thalen arrived at the checkpoint shortly after, his crystalline form pulsing with complex light patterns that indicated he was processing thoughts too complicated for simple translation. He approached the human team who were treating their various injuries.